Taken together, the islands of Great Britain, Ireland, and several smaller close by islands are known as the British Isles. Humans began arriving to Great Britain in 30,000 BC by walking across a land bridge known as Doggerland. A semi permanent ice sheet existed between Ireland and Great Britain, allowing humans to cross over to that island as well, although this ice bridge had melted away by 13,000 BC. The warmer climate and the ensuing rising sea levels caused Dogger Land to become submerged, creating the British Channel by 6200 BC. Now, being isolated on an island, the small population developed at a slower pace and was in the Neolithic Stone Age, which is compound stone tools and simple farming, at a time when civilizations around the Mediterranean were forging bronze tools. Most of these powerful societies would crumble after being invaded by a mysterious group of people known as the Sea People. The Sea People attacked the Bronze Age civilizations by boat and most likely originated from the Caucasus across the Black Sea. It is not for certain if the Sea People themselves possessed iron weapons and that it was their technological advancement that caused the Bronze Age collapse, or if rather ironworking technology was discovered in Anatolia by the Hittites, which, after being conquered by the Sea People, had their iron technology dispersed across the Middle East during the conquests of the remaining civilizations. Regardless, many old powers fell at this time, and iron tools and weaponry became commonplace. During the Iron Age, Northern Europe was home to rival tribes who lived in isolation and competed for resources. The Celtic people were one of these cultures who originated near the present day town of Hallstatt, Austria in 1200 BC. The Celts were an agrarian culture, but were also heavily influenced by the Austrian Alps around them. A large salt deposit existed near Hallstatt, which became a core part of Celtic culture and diet. Centuries of salt mining created deep man-made caverns in the ground that were eventually converted into large underground cemeteries. This access to deep underground depths gave the Celts a supply of iron ore, which allowed them to develop a strong iron working culture, making them the most prominent tribe in Europe not on the Mediterranean. By 275 BC, the Celts had settled and occupied territory all the way from the Iberian Peninsula and the British Isles in the west to the Carpathian Mountains in the east. In the British Isles, the Celts, with their iron tools, were easily able to defeat the indigenous people. The Celts themselves, however, were almost always under the threat of attack from the Romans, who referred to them as the Gauls. The early Roman Republic became so militaristic as a result of the constant warring going on with the stronger Etruscan kingdom in the north, who wanted to end the Republic, and the weaker Samnite people to the south, who Rome itself wanted to subjugate. Back in 700 BC, Greek settlers began arriving in southern Italy and established colonies in an area the Romans referred to as Magna Graecia. It is very likely that democratic and republican ideas may have first arrived in Rome from contact with these Greek settlers. Celts in far northern Italy would at this time often find employment as mercenaries for the rivals of Rome. They assisted the Samnites, although this was ultimately unsuccessful, and the Samnites were fully conquered and absorbed by Rome in 290 BC. The Romans then turned their attention to Carthage, who was also assisted by Celtic mercenaries, fighting them and defeating them in the Punic Wars. At this point, the Celts, or Gauls, were seen as the primary enemy of Rome and its greatest existential threat. The Romans set out to conquer Europe and neutralize the Gauls. This began in a series of conflicts known as the Roman Gallic Wars, which peaked in intensity in 250 BC and saw the Romans push the Gauls out of Italy. The foundations of the First Roman Republic were beginning to crumble under the pressures of Julius Caesar's desire for greater control over the decisions of government. By enlarging the threat that the Gauls posed for Rome, Julius Caesar was able to hold and secure the title of dictator and all its rights and responsibilities. In this definition, dictator powers of Rome would be comparable to the President of the United States ordering martial law and suspending individual rights during a time of existential crisis. Caesar conquered Gaul, which was essentially present-day France, in 50 BC and annexed it as a province. The Romanization of the Gallic people did not stop there, however. In 27 BC, the Roman Republic finally made the official switch to an empire with the ascension of Emperor Augustus. Augustus would order the conquest of the Celtic people living in Iberia, with the operation complete in 19 BC. The Romans determined that the final Celtic stronghold, the British Isles, would need to be conquered in order to stop the violence between local Celtic tribes and to open up the Isles for trade. The invasion was delayed until the year 43 AD due to crises elsewhere in the empire, but was then finally ordered by now Emperor Claudius. The conquest of Great Britain was a long, slow slog for the Roman troops as they pushed Celtic tribes further and further north. Temporary resistance was formed when Boudica, who was queen of the Iceni tribe, was able to unite various rival Celtic tribes in the year 60. The Romans crushed the rebellion and killed everyone, including Boudica, but she continued as a symbol of resistance and strength in English folklore. In 78, the Romans established the partially conquered Great Britain as the province of Britannia and appointed Agricola as its first governor. Agricola led Roman forces to complete the conquest of Wales, pushed into far northern Scotland, reaching the tip in 84. Occupation of Scotland was tenuous, however, as the local Celtic tribes there were able to put up greater resistance due to the mountainous geography. In 117, Emperor Hadrian ordered the withdrawal of Roman troops from Scotland and the construction of Hadrian's Wall to secure the frontier from the Scottish Celts, which were known as the Caledonians. The Caledonians were in reality two separate groups of Celtic people. The Picts, who were the traditional inhabitants of Scotland, and the Gaels, which were the Roman term for the Celtic people of Ireland, a reference to the old Gaul moniker, who since Roman occupation had made periodic raiding expeditions to Great Britain and began settling in Wales and Scotland, where they were known as the Scotti. The Romans attempted to push further north into Scotland by building the Antonine Wall in 142, but faced fierce Caledonian resistance and had to retreat back to Hadrian's Wall. During the waning years of the Roman Empire, as it collapsed, all Roman troops stationed in Great Britain were recalled to defend the heart of the empire in 410. Southern Great Britain at this point had been significantly Romanized, with the population there now distinctively being known as the Britons. Unlike the Scotti and Picts in Scotland, where the soil was rocky and unfarmable, southern Great Britain had lots of arable land and productive farms set up under Roman rule. The Britons now had to defend these lands from bands of Scottish raiders. Soon after Roman exit, the Britons appealed to the Saxon people, who were a Germanic coastal tribe in northwest Germany, to help defend the island to fill the security vacuum left by the Romans. The Saxons agreed to this in exchange for food and began to send soldiers over to the island. By 441, however, the Saxon soldiers began complaining about inadequate food supplies and chose to revolt against the Britons and seize control. They sent word back to Saxony to send for settlers and to invite the nearby tribes of the Jutes, who were living at the tip of Jutland in Denmark, and the Angles, who lived between the Saxons and Jutes in present-day Schleswig-Holstein. The Angles mainly settled in the northern part of the south of Britain, while the Saxons settling to the south and the Jutes to the southeast. These Germanic settlers became known colloquially as the Anglo-Saxons. Now in control, the Anglo-Saxon settlers divided southern Britain into 7 kingdoms known as the Heptarchy. The kingdoms were East Anglia, the kingdom of the East Angles, Essex, the kingdom of the East Saxons, Kent, the kingdom of the Jutes, Mercia, the kingdom of the Middle Angles, Northumbria, the kingdom of the Northern Angles, Sussex, the kingdom of the South Saxons, and Wessex, the kingdom of the West Saxons. The kingdoms were ruled by independent monarchs who all agreed to cooperate with each other. Many of the local Briton people were expelled from the island and forced to resettle in mainland Europe in a remote coastal part of northwest France known as Brittany. These settlers became known as the Bretons. By the 700s, Mercia had become the most powerful kingdom in Great Britain under the King Uffa and began to exert control in the political affairs of the other kingdoms. Sigebert became king of Wessex in 754 and was quickly disliked by the Mercians due to his unpredictable demeanor. The Mercians had King Sigebert deposed and replaced with Cynewulf, who would serve as a puppet king in Wessex for the Mercians. Sigebert was exiled to overlook the smaller regional area of Hampshire, but was stabbed to death by a resident who despised him for atrocities he had committed during his short stint as king. Sigebert's brother Cynewulf began to hatch a plan to kill Cynewulf to avenge the death of his brother. In 786, Cynewulf attacked Cynewulf with a knife, but Cynewulf fought back viciously, with the end result being both men dying of their wounds. Egbert, who was a descendant of the previous kings of Wessex before Mercian interference, was gaining momentum to succeed Cynewulf as king, so the Mercians preemptively exiled him to the Frankish kingdom in present-day France. They installed King Beorhtric as puppet king, who would not put up resistance as he was reportedly mentally retarded. During Beorhtric's 16-year reign, Wessex was largely administered by his wife and mother-in-law. Beorhtric died unexpectedly in 802, giving Egbert the opportunity to return to Britain and take the throne of Wessex. Egbert was a strong leader and was able to convince all of the British Saxon kingdoms to unite under the Kingdom of Wessex, bringing the number of kingdoms down to 4, which included Wessex, in addition to the Angle kingdoms of Mercia, Northumbria, and East Anglia. The Anglo-Saxons largely ignored the area of Wales and allowed it to remain in Britain control, who they eventually began to refer as the Welsh. While the language of the English is a mix of several languages, the language of the Angles became the most dominant and formed the base of the language English and serves as the source of its name. In 843, after large amounts of Scottish settlers had arrived in Scotland, they officially formed the independent Kingdom of Scotland with their Pict allies. In 865, Danish Viking invaders invaded Great Britain and defeated all the Angle kingdoms. King Alfred the Great of Wessex was able to defeat and hold back the Vikings to only control the previous Angle territory, which became known as the Danelaw, which signified that Danish law was administered and followed by the people living there. Alfred died in 899 and was followed by his son Edward the Elder, who continued to regain territory from the Vikings. His son Athelstan became king in 924 and was able to defeat the remaining Vikings and establish the new United Kingdom of England. Athelstan died with no children, so his brother Edmund became king. The Vikings at this time were able to regain control of the city of York and the surrounding area as a stronghold. In 946, Edmund was murdered by a criminal who was trying to rob him and was succeeded by his brother Edred. Edred would oversee the kingdom since Edmund's children were too young. When Edred died in 955, Edmund's oldest son, Edwig, became king. He ended up having to compete with his younger brother, Edgar, for power. And when he died in 959, Edgar had complete control and was able to finally defeat the Vikings at York. When Edgar died, there was a succession crisis as rival factions wanted a different son of his to reign. Edward the Martyr, his elder son, became king in 975, but was murdered by allies of his younger brother Alfred the Unready in 978, who then became king. Sensing the instability in England, Viking raider Swinefork Beard led to an expedition to take back England and forced Alfred into exile in Normandy, but died only 5 weeks into his reign. His son Cnut took over and worked to dismantle English power systems, creating a unified Danish kingdom stretching from Great Britain to Norway and Denmark. Under this system, local control was given out to allied nobles of the Danes, who they called earls. Cnut was then followed as king by his younger son, Harold Harefoot, in 1035. This angered Cnut's older son, Harthacnut, who was busy fighting a rebellion in Norway, so he decided to claim control of Norway himself, splitting the kingdom. The instability allowed Alfred's son, Edward the Confessor, who was born in exile while in Normandy, to return to the throne of England in 1042. He died in 1066 and was replaced by Harold Godwinson, one of the most wealthy and powerful earls in England, but a very controversial choice because he was not part of the royal succession. Sensing instability, William the Duke of Normandy invaded and conquered England and became king, who we now know as William the Conqueror at the Battle of Hastings.